we will now proceed with our next expert, who will talk on environment hazards. So we will welcome Mrs. Cyparsade. Mrs. Cyparsade, are you here?
Yes. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So you're from the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center. So you will be addressing to our participants on the topic of environmental hazards. So you may wish to introduce yourself and furthermore share your screen for your presentation. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Mrs. from National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center. I'm the disaster monitoring officer here. And also I'm assisted by my colleague, Mr. Bisesa, a coordinator for community mobilization. And good morning, everyone, again, and I will share my screen for the presentation. Yes.
Yes, we can see you,
so
and we can
see
your screen. So now it's perfect. You may proceed, please.
Yes, okay, thank you. So sorry for this short delay. So as I have already said that we are officers from the NDRMC, and we are under the aegis of the Ministry of Local Government and Disaster Risk Management. And so our presentation today will be on environmental hazards. But we at the center, we normally deal with every type of hazards, but we almost we do disaster risk reduction measures and disaster risk management measures. So my PowerPoint will be mostly on our measures that we are taking at the center to mitigate environmental hazards. So first of all, I will talk a bit about the basic terminologies in disaster risk reduction and the vulnerability of Republic of Mauritius, and thirdly, the governance, the framework in place internationally and locally. Then I will talk a bit on the mechanisms in place for the management of response operations. Then the general preparedness measures that our center is taking to mitigate these type of hazards, and some of our major projects that we are dealing with at the level of the center. So first of all, to understand disaster risk reduction and management, we have to first of all understand the basic terminologies. That is, what is a hazard? What are vulnerability? What do we mean by vulnerability? What do we mean by exposure? What do we mean by coping capacity? And finally, what is disaster risk reduction? These are the basic terminologies that we should know when dealing with disaster risk reduction and management. So first of all, what is a hazard? A hazard is a process or phenomenon or human activity that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, property damage, social and economic disruption, or environmental degradation. That is, in short, a hazard is what? A hazard is a phenomenon that can cause harm to human life, to property, to the environment, and or economic disruption and others. And I will talk a bit further in my presentation about our strategic framework. In this framework, 41 hazards have been identified for the Republic of Mauritius, which are mainly of meteorological, hydrological nature, geotechnical nature, technological, biological, and chemical nature. And now, if these hazards, they have a negative impact on the environment, then these hazards will be considered as environmental hazards. Like, as we all know, we have the MV Wakasho, the aground vessel MV Wakasho. It caused a major oil spill. This we call an environmental hazard. We also had the vessel MT Benita, which also considered as an environmental hazard. Now, if we have a cyclone or we have a heavy rain, but it doesn't cause any harm to the environment, any harm to human life, any harm to it doesn't cause any economic disruption, we doesn't categorize it as an environmental hazard. We categorize it as an environmental hazard, as I have just said, when it has a negative impact on the environment. Now, what is exposure? Exposure is the situation of people or infrastructure, housing, production capacities, and other tangible human assets that are located in hazard-prone areas. Vulnerability. Vulnerability are the conditions determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes which increase the susceptibility of an individual, a community, assets, or systems to the impact of hazards. Now, what is coping capacity? Coping capacity is the ability of people, organizations, and systems using available skills and resources to manage adverse conditions of risk or disasters. So, all this combined together is called disaster risk, and if we do not mitigate this will have an impact on the environment and it will be an environmental disaster. So what we should do, we should mitigate disaster risk. This is called disaster risk. Disaster risk is proportional to hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. As we all know, we all have done basic mathematics here, so we know disaster risk is proportional to hazard, disaster risk is proportional to exposure, and disaster risk is proportional to vulnerability. So if the hazard increases, disaster risk will increase. If exposure and vulnerability increases, disaster risk will increase. But disaster risk is inversely proportional to capacity. So if we increase our capacity, disaster risk will decrease. So this is the objective of our center. We implement soft measures to increase the capacity of our community, of our government, of our country to face these types of hazards. So risk is what? Risk is the combination of the probability of occurrence of a hazard and the magnitude of the consequence of this occurrence. So now, what is disaster risk reduction, which we do, our center do? Disaster risk reduction is aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contribute to strengthening resilience and therefore to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what is disaster risk management? It is not the same. Disaster risk management is the application of disaster risk policies and strategies to prevent new disaster risk, reduce existing disaster risk, and manage residual disaster risk, contributing to the strengthening of resilience and reduction of disaster losses. Disaster risk management is the application of disaster risk policies and strategies to prevent disaster risk. Now I will talk a bit about the vulnerability of Mauritius, of the Republic of Mauritius. So we are exposed to natural hazards like cyclones, storm surges, heavy rain, flash floods, landslide, sea level rise, tsunami, and according to the World Risk Report is a global report whereby each country is being assessed by some matrix. Okay, so in 2020 we were the 53rd country with the highest disaster risk, but in 2021 we have moved from the 53rd to the 51st country with the highest disaster risk. But we have to bear in mind that this scale is that when we have moved from 53rd to 51st, we are as if highest in disaster risk. It is not like a if we go upwards, we decrease our risk. If this is a type of staircase, if we can say, if we move upwards, we are moving to the highest disaster risk. And if 2022 we are if we say we have reached 100, our rank is 100, so we are working in minimizing the impacts of disaster risk, and we are the country with the least disaster risk. And we are also exposed to other hazards, like I have said, oil spills. We had the MV Wakasho and the MV Benita. We are also exposed to hazardous materials, landfill fires, sugarcane fires, and both the natural and the man-made hazards can have negative impact on the environment, and thereby we will classify them as environmental hazards. Now, internationally and also locally, we have governance, legal mechanisms in place. We have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, 2015-2030. We have our National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center itself. We have our National Disaster Scheme 2015. We have the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2016. And lately, we have developed our National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Policy, Strategic Framework and Action Plan 2020-2030, where I have already mentioned earlier that in this document, we have identified 41 hazards which our country is exposed to. Now, what is the Sendai Framework? Sendai Framework is a 15-year voluntary non-binding agreement which recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that the responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, and its aim is to have substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihood, and health. Now, Sendai Framework, it has 4 priorities and 7 global targets. As we can see here, the 7 global targets. 4 global targets here, we should substantially, 4 global targets concerns the reduction of global disaster mortality, number of affected people, economic loss in relation to GDP, damage to critical infrastructure and services disruption. And the other 3, we should substantially increase the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies. We have to increase international cooperation to developing countries, and we have to get access to early warning system and DRR information. So Sendai Framework tells us to substantially reduce 4 targets and to substantially increase 3 targets. We also have 4 points. First, we have to understand the risk. Second, we have to strengthen disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Third, we have to invest in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And fourth, we have to enhance disaster preparedness for effective response. So now I will talk a bit about our center. Our center was, as we all know, after the ash flood 2013, where 11 people lost their lives. Then decision was taken to have a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center in 2013. And at that time, the center was under the Prime Minister.
Mrs. Cyparsade?
Yes, I'm here. So sorry for this short problem. I got my internet is not stable. So sorry.
Yes,
I will share my screen again, I think. So
yeah, you may proceed where you have stopped.
okay. So I was talking about our center. So it acts as a main institution for the Republic of Mauritius for the planning, organizing, coordinating, and monitoring of disaster risk reduction and management activities at all levels.
Mrs. Cyparsade, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Actually, we cannot. You haven't shared your screen.
Okay. Now it's okay.
Yes, it's okay. We can see your presentation.
Yes. So I
Can
will move to where I stopped.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I was talking about our center. So it is the main institution for the Republic of Mauritius for the planning, organizing, coordinating, and monitoring of disaster risk reduction and management activities at all levels. As I have already given you the definition of disaster risk reduction and management before, so you will understand what our center does now. And also we have a national disaster scheme 2015, whereby we have these schemes shown on my screen, and whereby we have in all these schemes the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders are well laid down before, during, and after an emergency, a crisis, or a disaster. And in 2016, we proclaimed our act and the OOM Act. And in this act also, we have a council, a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, which is chaired by the Honorable VPM, where we have all the stakeholders concerned. We make decisions about the OOM activities we should be doing for the benefit of our country to increase resilience. And we also have a national crisis committee, which meets when there is a crisis in the Republic of Mauritius, not necessarily in Mauritius. It may be in Mauritius, Rodrigues, Agalega, or Saint-Brandon, whereby we take decisions about what response operations will be taken to respond to the imminent disaster or emergency. And we have in Rodrigues, we have the Rodrigues Emergency Operations Command, which deals with disaster operations in Rodrigues. And in Agalega and Saint-Brandon also, we have disaster management coordinators who look in disaster risk reduction matters for Agalega and Saint-Brandon in a monthly basis, or whenever there is a disaster or emergency. And as I have already said to you earlier, we have developed our National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Strategic Framework, Policy and Action Plan in 2021. And the strategic framework, it aims to reduce the level of risk so as to strengthen resilience. And as I have already said, that in the strategic framework, we have identified 41 hazards which our Republic of Mauritius is faced to, and we are working towards mitigating these types of hazards, and so that these type of hazard doesn't become tomorrow a disaster. So this is the aim of our center. And we also we have in our strategic framework, we have 5 strategic pillars, but I won't go in detail. But the strategic pillars, we go in line with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which I have mentioned earlier, the 4 priorities. So our strategic framework is in line with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And we also have an action plan where the action plan implements 4 objectives to, as if the same, to mitigate mitigate disaster risk and strengthen resilience of our communities and ultimately the Republic of Mauritius. So our action plan is not meant only for Mauritius, but is meant for the Republic of Mauritius, that is Mauritius, Rodrigue, Tanganyika, and St. Brandon. And now I will talk a bit about the mechanism in place for emergencies, crises, and disasters. As we all have seen in the media, in the televisions, and we all have heard about our National Emergency Operations Command. This is what it is. Normally we work in two modes, a normal mode and a crisis mode. When there is a crisis, an emergency, we activate our National Emergency Operations Command to coordinate all response operations on ground. And the National Emergency Operations Command is headed by the Commissioner of Police. And as I have said, it is activated to coordinate all response and recovery activities during the event of a disaster, emergency, or crisis. And it concerns everyone, all stakeholders concerned, the first responders or any stakeholders concerned. And we report to the National Crisis Committee, as I have already told earlier. The National Crisis Committee is chaired by the Honorable DPM. So the NEOC, as we say, we have 3 levels. Level 1 is monitored by our staff itself. Level 2 is monitored by our staff and first responders. And level 3 is a full-scale activation whereby designated NEOC members, as we say, designated stakeholders come here to take decisive actions to coordinate response operations on ground. So this all we do to mitigate the negative impact of hazards. So this is the designated members that come in the NEOC to work with us to coordinate response operations on ground. And also at the level of local authorities, we have 12 local disaster management coordinators which have been recruited to look after disaster risk reduction and management in their respective jurisdiction, and they report to the National Center on a monthly basis. And now I will talk a bit of general preparedness measures that we take at the level of our center to mitigate negative impact of disasters, negative impacts of hazards. So here at the center, normally we implement soft measures like simulation exercises. We develop contingency plan. We do a sensitization campaign, awareness campaign, and we do a community disaster response program, which empower volunteers in vulnerable regions. So first of all, emergency planning. So our center, we assist ministries, departments, to even private bodies to develop emergency plans, contingency plans for their organizations, or we also assist local authorities to develop contingency plans for their respective jurisdictions. As you can see, we have assisted hospitals, schools, residential care homes, the public sector and the private sector. Also, we have worked with DCA, that is the aviation department, to develop contingency plans. And these all we do why to prevent the hazards from becoming disasters. And also we do simulation exercises, which is the priority 4 of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And normally we organize simulation exercises to as if to make people aware when there will be an imminent disaster, what they should do in that period, in that time, because it will not happen exactly, but people will know what they should do if they have to evacuate, if they have and we also do awareness campaigns. As you can see, we have conducted awareness campaigns in vulnerable regions. with ministries, with Business Mauritius. We also do sensitization campaigns for women at women empowerment centers, for schools, and we also conduct with persons with disabilities. And we have, as I have told earlier, we conduct a community disaster response program. This is what? It is a program to inculcate a culture of risk reduction within the population and building the capacity of community to respond to disasters. That is, we identify vulnerable regions, and our team, that is, it doesn't mean only NDRMC, we have the first responders, the SMF, the fire, the Red Cross, other concerned stakeholders. We organize a program in vulnerable areas with approximately 30 volunteers to train them how to cope with a hazard when it is happening in their region. So, as I have said, we inculcate in persons a culture of risk reduction, and we train about 30 volunteers in vulnerable regions in the field of in basic techniques, life-saving techniques like fire safety, rope handling, first aid, water rescue activity, and other basic techniques. And I have said that we doesn't do it only by NDOMC staff. We also have instructors from different organizations. And these are some photos of the community disaster response program that we conduct. Like you see here, we are training them in the basic life techniques. Okay, rope handling, sandbagging. Also, we conducted in Agadega. Here we are teaching them how to do first aid, and also we have normally we do sensitization campaigns. We do it in sorry, I have it. Yes, so this is our examples of our simulation exercises and some of the photos of our community disaster response program. And also during these exercises, we also have to test the contingency plans that we have developed, and we test the manning of our NEOC and of our LEOC, because at the local authorities also, we have a local emergency operations command. So during these exercises, we test all these, if there are gaps, challenges that we should address, and also we have also a media coverage on it. And now I will talk a bit about our major projects that we are doing with other stakeholders or with international organizations in disaster risk reduction and management matters. We have worked with Telecom to install an emergency alert app, Mighty Weather, and we have a pilot project at the NDRMC concerning the disaster information management system with the support of the UNDP, whereby this system will allow us to involve in disaster statistics. That is, if we have a heavy rainfall, or we have a cyclone, or we have any hazard, we have an oil spill, concerned stakeholders will give us the statistics of what has happened, how many people have been affected, the mortality rate, the damage caused. So we will put it in this system, and ultimately we have to report to the UNDRR, the United Nations for Disaster Risk Reduction, comme si c'est le maison mère pour nous. Okay, and we also have we have conducted a study on the vulnerability of the Republic of Mauritius to seismic hazard and tsunami in 2019 with the support of the UNDP. And one of the recommendations of this study was to have an operational study of the coastal risk of the islands of Republic of Mauritius to coastal erosion and marine flooding. So this we are doing it with the Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Environment is leading this project. And this is funded by the AFD, and the consultant is the Bureau de Recherche Géologique et Minière, which is a French institution in France. And also we have developed a CADRI partnership, that is a capacity for disaster risk reduction initiative. This is what? It is a multi-sectoral assessment that these experts have come to look in our country regarding DRM capacities. And now we are working with the Coalition for Disaster Risk Infrastructure, CDRI, which is a renowned institution in India, for which will support member nations to build disaster and climate resilience of existing and future infrastructure. And also we collaborate with regional and international organizations like SADC, the JICA, World Bank, IORA, the AFD, and the PIRWA, and we should not forget also the UNDRR. So I think that's all for my presentation. Yes, lastly, also I won't leave this one. We are working on a major project, which is the National Multi-Hazard Emergency Alert System. This system will do what? This system will allow us to disseminate warnings to a maximum number of people in Mauritius in a short time. So this system will cover Mauritius, Rodrigues, Agalega, and Saint-Brandon, and it will be maintained 24/7 by 366. So I think now that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cyparsade, for your presentation, actually, which is very enriching. So we as Mauritian, we are witness during times of cyclones, how vulnerable we are. We have witnessed flash floods, erosion, and let's hope that participants of the InnovEd project will come up with some interesting and innovative solutions towards those disasters. So let's see if we have any questions from our participants regarding this topic. Oops. Okay. So anyway, well, thank you once again, Mrs. Cyparsade, for your time and presentation. And let's hope to hear from you if there are any questions coming afterwards. And we thank you once again for your time. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. We are available at the center for any queries from your participants anytime. And I apologize again for the short internet connection that I had. And we thank NPCC for organizing this short presentation. And we remain available for any queries on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.